Welcome everyone to this panel this evening. This is going to be an exciting discussion at the Start Me Up Festival and Virtual FinTech Fair, talking about enabling sustainability through FinTech. My name is Jame DiBiasio, and I'm based in Hong Kong, where I run a business called DigFin. It's a website that covers digital finance, FinTech, and digital assets. And this question of how we leverage what we've learned in FinTech for the purposes of sustainable investing is something that I write about a lot at DigFin, and I'm also active with the Hong Kong FinTech Association on doing events on this topic. So I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. We have a really cool lineup of speakers that are going to talk about some of the practicalities of how we leverage FinTech for sustainability. Before we get into that, let me just introduce who we're going to hear from. In, I guess, alphabetical order by family name, we've got Tek Yew Chia from Singapore. He is joining us as the chairman of the Sustainability Commission at the Singapore FinTech Association. So welcome, Tek Yew. We've got Priti Rathi Gupta. She's dialing in from India. She is founder of LXME India. LXME is a startup, a FinTech startup with a twist. I'll leave it to her to tell you about that. And finally, from France, joining us is Aiaze Mitha. He is digital ambassador for the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So we've got a pretty diverse group of people here talking about a lot of things. They all have different interests. When we were talking about this panel earlier, I was trying to understand who does what. And of course, we've got people that, if you think about ESG, you've got people here that are working on all of those letters, okay? There's all of those components are involved in sustainability. But I think what we're gonna really talk about today is that even though, Aiaze works for the UN, Tek Yew is at a big association for the industry. What we're really talking about, all three of these folks, is bringing this down to the community level and leveraging this technology really to change the way people interact through finance in ways that can hopefully lead to better outcomes for our societies and for really the health of the planet. So with that grandiose introduction, let me start with, I mentioned that we've got the E and the S and the G. So I'm going to take it backwards. Aiaze, I'm going to start with you I think I'm pigeonholing you into the G, at least to start with, because I know you go broader than that. But when it comes to what the work that you do at the UN Capital Development Fund, the projects that you're looking to support, tell us a little bit about how you go from being this kind of giant global institution into something where you're finding projects that can really move the needle on the ground.
Thank you, Jamie. And so, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Super excited to be here with all of you. I guess to your question, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to really bring in international and local expertise together in driving change in different countries. So we really work at the country level to start with as a global organization, but really with a very strong country focus. And in each one of these countries, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help regulators, policymakers think about how FinTech can actually contribute to sustainable development. And I can provide examples a bit later, but we're really looking at ways in which FinTech can be harnessed in channeling new financing, in supporting ESG assessment, risk analysis, impact measurement and verification, but also some other things in really enabling also people to become the major actors in driving sustainability. And how do you think about policies and regulations and governance that ensure that this is aligned? Perhaps just as a quick comment, traditionally, regulation of FinTech has really been focusing on financial stability, market integrity, consumer protection, to a certain extent, financial inclusion in a sense. And what we are trying to do is to really broaden the lens to encompass a much broader and larger set of SDGs in the way we actually think about the potential that FinTech brings. Final piece of statistic, if you just think about biodiversity and nature, for instance, 55% of FinTech innovations in that space that really drive biodiversity impact are blockchain enabled and blockchain powered. So that sort of tells you how the governance piece and the policy and regulatory piece is important in a sense.
Before we get into some of the specifics, Aiaze, what is it about fintech that's relevant here? I mean, we're talking about companies that were set up to do, better digital payments or whatever it is in their wheelhouse. Let's have an app with zero commission and get everybody, trading on it. Why is this even relevant?
I would say with fintech innovations, there's a potential to scale through network effects, through socialized approaches online that you will not find in any other traditional business. If you think, for instance, of Ant Forest in China, because I understand we have a lot of participants in the audience from China today, in about 2 years' time, through the Alipay's application called Ant Forest, which is really a gamified application in engaging people to make greener choices, they've been able to mobilize the forces of 550 million people in planting 220 million trees in just about 2 years. So you see the potential effect in terms of really driving scale. And so we see in many markets innovations around fintechs enabling access to capital intensive utilities, for example. If you think developing economies, you have pay-as-you-go models that allow people to have access to clean energy, to clean water in an affordable way. If you think more mature markets, you have circular economy models that allow us to reduce our plastic footprint and environmental footprint that are all fintech powered, in the sense that fintech engages you with a digital experience, with feedback on your footprint, unlocks access through fractionalized payments, and really drives scale. And I would say this is where the magic of fintech is.
Okay, that's great. And I think you also mentioned, I think the gamification is one way that the way it engages people. That's a technology or a process that can be put to good use or bad use. But obviously, if it's put to good use, then I think it can have an outsized impact compared to just trying to show up at your bank and get your statement. Priti, I'm going to go from Aiaze was sort of way up here, and Priti, you're kind of down here on the ground. You're in the trenches with your customers. Tell us a little bit about LXME and what you're trying to achieve. Oh, Priti, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry.
There you go.
Thank you for that, and I like the way you put it. That I'm really getting with a customer segment. So LXME is essentially a fintech which aims to get financial services to women. And I think globally we've seen women, in the entire category of customers who access financial services, women are a very, very small percentage. And that's what LXME aims to do, to sort of personalize it, democratize it in a very, very different way. So sort of, make it financial inclusion being one aspect of it, but also essentially being, and that's the beauty of fintech, right? That's the impact that we want to make, is not just democratize it and get financial inclusion, but also personalize that in a very, very effective way to the needs of women. Because the way they look at money, the way, whether it's right from credit to savings to investing their money, the mindset is very, very different. Also, it's a behavioral aspect that traditional financial services have obviously not been able to cater to. So that's what LXME aims to do.
What do you think is the let's say the tendency with women investors and savers to be perhaps more responsive to the kinds of themes around sustainability or doing good? Is there a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, there is a sense of, I always say this, that nurturing is a part of the DNA that comes with women, right? And I think therefore sustainability by itself is just very, very appealing as a concept. So for example, one of the things that we also do in LXME is that every woman investor that's there on the platform can actually handhold another woman investor in the marginalized section of the society to just sort of, the basic financial tools like a bank account. We're talking country like India, so access, just opening a bank account, getting access to a basic insurance that the government offers you, sort of handhold. And we realize that that's a huge sort of boost. I think women find that very, very interesting. Part of what, part of sort of go to market for Lakshmi is that's the value proposition, right? It's about building a community of women who are helping themselves, helping each other, as well as reaching out to women in the marginalized section of society and saying, how do we help you, make the best of your savings and sort of build your future. Also help them get credit through the various options that are available, sort of being able to access that. So I think that's really top of mind. It's always been, and to be able to get it on a fintech platform just sort of helps, one, the expanse and the reach which you're able to get through just by using technology itself is brilliant. But today, India as a country, the number of smartphone users, it's surpassing day by day. I think the number of smartphone users in India is incredible, and a large portion of them are actually women. And that just makes it so easy for them to access and, sort of have sustainability on top of mind. Just the social impact actually is very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mentioned earlier that each one of you I can sort of pigeonhole as the E or the S or the G. I think obviously I would stick you in the S for social development there, Priti. But and so I guess you're ticking a box just by having the business model that you have. But maybe you could give us a sense of, are you at the stage yet, or is it relevant yet for your customers to be thinking about sustainable investments or putting their money to things that will have a broader impact on the society or the community where they live?
Absolutely. So I think one, I already related about the social piece of it, but also in terms of investing, we realize that women investors they're far more attuned and they are very, very interested in also investing in ESG companies, investing in ESG mutual. I think that them is very, very, India as a country, I think we've sort of seen ESG investing come about just the last few years, with the number of women investors asking about ESG investing, as well as investing into, interestingly, companies that have more women on boards, companies that are run by women, is very, that ask is very high. So for us, I think we don't sort of on Lakshmi right now offer individual stocks, but there is a huge demand to invest into ESG mutual funds, which tells you, that just the cognizance of the fact that, yes, we want to make a difference and we want to be committed to ESG is very high. Great.
All right. We'll come back and learn a little bit more about that. I want to ask Tek Yew to talk. And actually, before Tek Yew, you do, just for the audience, if you would like to ask some questions to the panelists, we'd love to hear from you. So I think the folks at the Virtual FinTech Festival will be handling the communications. But I think if you want to go and put something in the Q&A or whatever you've got in your computer there to send a question in, please do. Now, Tek Yew, Singapore FinTech Association, what kind of projects are you guys doing that on the sustainability front? Maybe just tell us sort of how you, as a community in Singapore, have been thinking about this.
Yeah, so I guess the thinking behind this is that, fintechs actually exist to solve problems of the past, right? The problems with financial inclusion, the problems of the underserved and all that. And the underlying technology that help them do it, a lot of it has been blockchain, mobile applications, AI, machine learning, you name it, all the technology have been deployed to actually solve this, right? Whether it's microloans, whether it's, lending to specific SME segments or women or anything. So when we start looking at the last 5 years of having got all these success stories in Singapore, we then say that when we start looking at this whole transition to green, how do we encourage the fintechs, right, to actually start focusing on this? So instead of just generic microloans, can we create microloan programs for, factories that want to, put in solar panels, right, to put in, new sensors and so on and so forth that will help them save energy or save water or whatever it might be. So we are really trying to move that into that. for this sort of projects, we have worked with MAS to actually start this Global FinTech Accelerator, right, for 2021, which is 100% focused on sustainability, right? So we are literally calling for ideas from all around the world, right? For anybody to say that I've got technology, I've got ideas that can help solve some of these problems. And those of these problems are the same problems you deal with when you look at microlending, right? Banks don't lend to SMEs because SMEs cannot provide them with, the sort of financial data, verifiable data that they need, right? So a lot of these fintechs have solved the problem, by actually, finding ways to read transaction data or even utility data rather than, financial data from financial statements, right? So the same thinking, right? Can we solve the data problem to make lending or fundraising in this space easier, right? So that the SMEs or the companies will gain from it, but also the banks can take credit for having made that impact, right, from the lending side. So I think that is one program that's going on, very actively now. We've just launched it. I think applications closed in sort of the third week of June. So we're getting, good applications, and it's like, within the first week that we launched it, we've got 60 registrations and so on and so on. So we're tracking that number, right?
Can you give us a flavor? I know it's a little early yet, but could you give us a flavor for some of the ideas that you're reviewing?
So I think it is early, but I think the ideas are coming from the space of data. There's a lot around the blockchain applications. So how do I use blockchain to track supply chain, right? And in the supply chain, you obviously have got documents that are lodged into the blockchain that allows you to have the data to decide provenance, right? Did they come from sustainable farms? Did they come from the right places? Are they even using transport models that are energy efficient, right? So what are the things that you look for in order to say this is really a green end-to-end value chain, right? So those things are coming out very strongly. So I think, again, because it's global, we've got a fair number of applications, not just in Singapore but Southeast Asia generally, then the rest of Asia, and actually a fair bit from Europe as well, right? We know that Europe is actually ahead when it comes to, especially the climate change part. So a lot of those ideas are percolating across to this part. So we are quite excited about it. So we should know a lot more by the end of
yeah. How, Tek Yew, with the cross-border element, if you're getting projects in from around the region and the world, very generically, fintechs sometimes have a real hard time in our part of the world scaling overseas, right? They cross one border and it's new rules and new regulations and data sovereignty issues and so on. So are we going to have the same problem or the same challenges when it comes to doing sort of sustainability projects, or do you see a way that these can be these will be able to scale more quickly?
Yeah, so I think this is the 5th or 6th year that we are running a global fintech accelerator with different teams. But I think the idea here is always to first get the good ideas, pair them up with corporate sponsors or corporate partners that will actually work with them to come up with a proof of concept and potentially a prototype for this, right? So that the corporate partner will also provide mentorship, right? The commercialization aspects, but also bring them across the region, hopefully. And one fintech can have multiple corporate sponsors, right? So the whole idea is to sort of matchmake them to some extent. The other things that we have put in place is, that there are grants that are available to finance the proof of concept, right? So MAS has a sort of technology innovation grant that can be applied into it. So we're hoping that once you get all this in, you actually have got a good running start, right? So any ideas that need, I guess, some sort of regulatory decisioning around it, we can actually do that in a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, right? So the whole idea is if you are participating in this program, you essentially go through a fast track program, right? To make sure that, this is almost like you are the winners of this, right? And therefore, you are almost immediately credible, right? You have been judged by a large number of subject matter experts, and you've got corporate and regulatory, I guess, support for your idea, right? So we hope that all this will actually be I guess the softer reasons why people want to come and participate in this, other than the usual, here's the price for 20,000 or 50,000, right? Because our experience that very good fintechs are finding that their role in life is not to enroll in competition, right? Their role in life is to commercialize ideas, right? So competition itself is to me a stepping stone. It's not the end game.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, that was my next question, was that commercial aspect. I know it's, as we've already said, it's a little bit early, but fintechs and anyone else, they have to make a business out of this. Are you seeing that what's happening now, is it more just a way to enter relationships with big customers that can, big counterparties that can give them access to users? Are they going for eyeballs, classic kind of Silicon Valley growth model? Or are they trying to figure out how to be profitable with these services from a very early point?
I think in our model, there's usually two steps, right? I think Singapore being 5 million people, right, smaller than a village in India or whatever, right? It's not one where you take a pure B2C play, right? So normally fintechs come to Singapore and they find partners, right? Be it a bank or whatever, right? So you become almost a technology partner to a bank. But if you have a proven use case, right, and it works, it will give you the confidence to then go into a bigger market like Indonesia, right, where you now have a B2C model of 190 or 200 million people, where you could actually change your business model. I may not need to partner with a bank. I can actually go access direct, right, or partner with a number of institutions. May not even be banks, right? It could be, it could be an e-commerce player, right, and so on and so forth. So Singapore is a great, training ground, launch pad, proof of concept. You name it, we probably have got some, capability around being a great innovation center, pilot center, right?
I just want to ask you, because Aiaze had sort of referenced Ant Forest. Are you seeing a lot of interest from mainland China companies looking to do stuff?
Well, we are starting to see, obviously, a fair bit of Chinese tech companies coming to Singapore, right? Everything from Tencent to Ant Financial. So Ant has got one of the digital banking licenses, right? You got C, which is backed by Tencent. You got ByteDance coming here. So we are seeing a lot of Chinese tech companies literally making Singapore some of their tech headquarters, right? For whatever reasons, right? But I think when you start to see big groups come to Singapore, make Singapore somewhat a second home, you probably will see the rest gravitate towards Singapore, right? So we are starting to see that. But I also see that a lot of Chinese companies are again looking at Singapore only as a hub, a HQ, with the intention to replicate somewhat their model into a place like Indonesia, right? Which obviously is again that the big prize to win with 200 million people, right? So I think we are starting to see that, and that's the role we will play in Singapore. Right, we have 1,000 fintechs registered with the Singapore FinTech Association. I don't think this market can support 1,000, right? But we can support 1,000 if we are looking at it from a Southeast Asia perspective, right? And if we are using them, not just as a direct to customer model, but a partnership with banks, insurance companies, and so on.
Yeah. Aiaze, I wanted to ask you about some of the challenges in your work. There's obviously, it's very trendy and very desirable, I think, for companies to be seen as having good ESG or sustainability credentials. But then we get into the issues of greenwashing, or we end up with sort of ridiculous situations where some heavy polluting company does one project that's that's kind of green, but but it's coming from a company that would not really classify as a very sustainable business. How do you manage this issue, because you're dealing with things at such a high level? What are the ways you mitigate greenwashing?
So first of all, we don't really work with large corporates involved in that space. That's not sort of my area. I'm really focusing on fintech innovations and fintech driving green outcomes. And so that falls under the umbrella of green finance. So whatever, Priti was talking about in terms of what she's doing at gender equality and gender inclusion is one aspect of it. What Tek Yew was talking about in solving the data asymmetry problem in being able to provide credit and lending to SMEs with today globally $5 trillion of SME financing gap, and SMEs are the largest employer in the world. These are sort of the issues that fintech can actually solve. Now, when it comes to specific issues of nature and biodiversity impact or climate impact, obviously there's a lot of science-based approaches now, more and more. So that you have a combination of, on the one hand, science-based approaches to actually measuring actual accurately impact on plastic content, carbon content, climate impact, etc. on one hand. And on the other hand, you have a number of taxonomies and regulations now that are being pushed forward. So you have, of course, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure that has been working for a while now, and there's a number of regulations that are being applied across the board, across industries, not just in the fintech space, but the financial sector and other corporates in terms of their disclosures on climate impact. You have the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure that's working right now, and that will be probably providing some initial findings at the Convention on Biological Diversity, in China in November. These will be setting standards and rules in terms of how we expect companies, fintech and non-fintech, to actually report back on their nature and carbon and climate and biodiversity impacts. So in many different ways, you have sort of one trend of standardization, and you have another trend of deeper expertise now in accessing and analyzing data to actually be able to extract sort of impact and footprint information. And obviously, we use all sorts of technologies from AI to remote sensing, satellite imagery, etc. And so perhaps I can just give you sort of one brief example. A project that I am currently working on in Uganda is about giving loans to actually smallholder farmers, but based on specific biodiversity metrics. And so what you do is you use your traditional sort of payment data-based scoring algorithms, etc., and you start inputting into it satellite imagery to try to track if they're actually deforesting around where the land is, how they're actually treating their crop, and whether they're actually overexploiting land. You have soil scanners that give you the quality of soil. You have sound scrapers that give you a full print of the biodiversity sound, but also natural sounds and human activity related sounds. And all of these get inputted into the scoring algorithm that will give you and make a credit decision and will actually condition loan terms and conditions to how well you're doing on these biodiversity metrics. So there's many different ways in which now we can actually harness technology to be able to really measure impact very closely using standards, but also track risks more closely as well. So that's starting to really happen, and we're implementing it in a few countries.
What are you finding with standards? Is it important that countries harmonize on these things, or just that the industry agrees what is what? This seems to be a big issue for portfolio managers, risk analysts, and so on. But in terms of just trying to get on with it, like the project you just described in Uganda, is it a big deal or not?
Yeah, so standards are a big deal in the sense that, first of all, the treatment of standards is not the same across jurisdictions. In some markets, these are voluntary standards, and it's based on voluntary reporting. So as a large corporate, you can report on certain good aspects of your business, and you can avoid reporting back on lesser compliant aspects of your business, in a sense. So there's that aspect of reporting being voluntary or mandatory, and different jurisdictions are adopting different approaches. Standards are usually designed for traditional businesses, not necessarily well suited to digitally enabled businesses that have very specific properties and characteristics in terms of scaling extremely fast and in terms of really driving multiplier network effects, if you would like. And so this is sort of one area where I think some of the standards are struggling, but everyone is now really coming together in trying to harmonize these. And obviously, as Tek Yew was mentioning, some jurisdictions are leading the way. So Europe, for instance, in terms of climate, and the European Green Deal that's just coming out right now are really setting a benchmark for how this could be done. And more markets are actually converging around this. So this would be important in the long term for much broader conversation than the fintech discussion we're having, but really across the board, in a sense.
If you're a fintech and you want to get involved in this, or you've got a like a microloan capability or something that could be positioned or repurposed for this sort of thing, do they need to wait for standards to arrive, or should they just be getting rolling up the sleeves and get stuck in?
So I'm sure others will have specific views, but I would say innovation is coming from the ground up, and it's usually what triggers then a regulatory move and a standardization move. So in the same way as blockchain, and perhaps we'll have a chance to talk about this, in the same way as blockchain has really had significant impact in the climate and biodiversity areas in terms of enabling new innovative models, in the same way fintechs are also bringing new models. And then that actually then, as they start scaling, as they experiment and they start scaling, that allows regulators to draw lessons and to start actually regulating and potentially bringing in new standards as well. So I wouldn't say we have to wait. I'd say it's actually a good thing to start addressing the urgent challenges that we're all facing, but work hand in hand with the regulator, work with them, involve them, have them sort of be part of the process and the learning journey. You have a lot of regulatory sandboxes, and I'm sure Tek Yew will have some views on that. But so there's mechanisms now that allow for innovation to flourish in the absence of strong regulations and standards, but then those would come in very quickly in a second stage.
Yeah. What, before I ask my next question to Priti, I just want to remind the audience, if you would like to ask a question to any of the panelists, please put your question into the platform, and we'd be happy to take those. Priti, I want to ask you about, I think what we've been hearing both from you as well as from Aiaze and Tek Yew is, we're trying to leverage the technology that was designed to kind of refashion the way that financial services are not just delivered, but also even conceived of. And you're at the forefront of that with your constituency. How do we change behavior? We're all used to, I still drink water out of a plastic bottle if I go for a hike. When COVID restrictions lift, you can be sure I'm going to be on an airplane. How do we change behavior or price it in or create ways to get people to kind of change their habits? Because I think, this is as Aiaze said, this is a ground up kind of thing. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is get people to change the way that we interact with each other and our impact on the planet.
Great. I think that's what I do for a living day in, day out. And I'd love to, the analogy with ESG. I mean, if say 5 years back, you came to India and you spoke about ESG, it was a concept that was not very palatable. It was not what, companies wanted to speak about. But today, when you speak about ESG, there's a lot of interest, and companies want to sort of, divert and pivot towards at least in one of these sort of, aligning with one of the ESG pillars. And I think what has worked is essentially, it's not, I think ESG is, or sustainability is a voluntary choice. And therefore you can choose to do it or not do it. But I think over a period of time, when there is anecdotal evidence that it does make a difference, whether it's profitability, whether it's to the environment around you, whether it's the community around you, I think once you start seeing evidence, that's when I think it fosters change. And I think that's exactly, what we've used in LXME as well, because we were asking for a behavioral change, right? You went out and saying that as women, traditionally mindsets were that men manage money. So why should you change that habit, right? Why should you look at it differently? And therefore, it was important. What we did was create a community of women where women came together and then started talking to each other. So there was like a peer-to-peer interaction between women who had already started managing their money or had started investing their money, and women who were just who were sitting on the fence or were just very skeptical, right? And I think those conversations and just evidence to say that doing it yourselves just gives you so much control over your life and your life decisions, brought about that difference. And I think to me, that probably is one of those ways where you can bring about change. I think there has to be evidence to say that this is a better choice, right? Because when you're making a choice, you're saying, okay, this is a better choice to make. And then saying on what levels and, which are these factors that this is, this is sort of affecting, and how does that make your life or the community around you or the environment around you a better place, not just for you, but for your children and for people around you. I think there is this consistent evidence or proof that one needs to sort of bring about to, really bring about a habit change.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the other two panelists on this as well, because I think this is kind of the crux of what we're really talking about, is using technology to make people behave in a different way. Obviously, hopefully for constructive uses. Tek Yew, any thoughts you can share? And then of course I'd like to get
I think the mobilizing the women community is one. The other is mobilizing the youth community. Right. So in sustainability, what we're trying to do here, we also run a program, Singapore FinTech Association, running a program with what we call the Poly FinTech 100, which is actually a collection of 5 polytechnics where we ran again a same sort of hackathon, problem statements relating to sustainability. And the whole idea is, how do we actually create more awareness and actually get the youth, right, to really come up with ideas of how they can play a role in this. Right, and the whole idea is, frankly, 2050, whatever targets we are looking for, is actually for their benefit rather than for people like us, right? So that was very much that program around that. But you see the same. I think no amount of financial incentives or regulatory pressure would change an individual's behavior as much as your kids changing your behavior. Right, and that is where we try to see that effect, right, where kids will put pressure on their parents, right, young employees will put pressure on their employers to say that unless you believe in this saving the climate, right, we just have a misalignment of values, right, and so that's where we're trying to see again, how do we help even gamify this, right, to actually bring applications that are in tune with the youth. Right? Can we incentivize them to, dump the plastic bottles? Can I incentivize them not to have electronic waste? So if an iPhone, is obsolete because it's the old model, right? Trade it in, sell it, or donate it. Don't just dump it in the waste paper basket, right? So all these little things is about creating awareness and then changing habits by putting, sort of gamification around it. Right, getting points for being green. Yeah.
Just on that point, is there a little bit of hubris of people who are, we're sort of all, advanced in our careers and know what we're doing? Well, at least you three do. Is there? I mean, the kids are already organized. I mean, the Gen Zs, they're on all kinds of platforms, whether it's TikTok or what have you, and if they, and a lot of them are very engaged, right? I mean, they're a lot more sophisticated and a lot more engaged in these issues than we certainly were when we were that young. So is finance there to tell them kind of how to teach them how to do things, or should we be thinking of it as the kids are all right and we just have to catch up with them and provide them with the tools to make them express what they already believe?
Well, so I think the awareness is there, right? But I think putting in the right tools to make it easier for them to, to actually behave or actually do the right things, right? Based on what they believe, right? So in the past, even the ideas of disposing an electrical item from the house is actually not as easy as we think, right? If it's a small device, yes, right? But if your printer doesn't work anymore, it's not that easy to actually just trade it in, right? So these platforms where people are doing buying and selling, on a e-commerce platform, right? We could actually use that sort of platform to promote some of this, right? Even if it's, not for profit, right? It's just getting rid of it, right?
Yeah, I hate to cut you off there. We're running out of time and we're getting some questions in from the audience. And I know Aiaze also wanted to talk about this, this making people change thing happen. But Aiaze, maybe you could answer this instead. I think it's also a good question. This is from a student. So within FinTech for sustainability, what are the most important areas that a student could look forward to? So I guess, you're a young person, you want to get into FinTech. What are the kinds of opportunities that these people that you see, the kinds of companies or the kinds of expertise or, what are people going to find available to do something in this space?
That's a really difficult question to answer because it really depends on one's priorities and preferences and interests, right? All of what we've been discussing right now has to be extremely locally relevant. And so in some countries, you might be more concerned with the conservation of elephants or the rainforest. In other countries, you might be more concerned with air pollution. In other countries, you might be more concerned about food waste. So I would say there's a number of issues that are available today that can be addressed effectively through technology and blockchain innovations. And I was mentioning at the beginning in the biodiversity space, for instance, there's a lot of blockchain innovation going on that really supports investments into natural capital, whether you're tokenizing the amount of carbon sequestered by an elephant or the amount of carbon sequestered by a whale, or whether you're tokenizing the amount of oxygen produced by a tree and you're able to turn that into a digital asset that gets traded. So I would say if I was a young student today, which I'm not anymore, although I'm always learning, I would love to be involved in climate and biodiversity topics because I think this is sort of the most significant challenge ahead of us. I would look at cutting edge technologies around blockchain, obviously, given the role that they play in driving innovations in that space. And I would also be then really looking at sort of that nexus of sustainability and fintech innovations, which I think is a slightly relatively new space. So you have a blockchain biodiversity community that's now emerging and that's growing and developing. And I'm sure this is really going to develop further over the next few years. And so that's one area that I would be quite excited about as a student.
Yeah, Priti, you are in the community. When you've got young people either coming to you looking for a job or whatever, what do you say to them? What's the opportunity set for the people just entering the job market?
Well, I think, and I hear Aiaze when he says that the opportunities today are so far, they're so different and just so much wider than the opportunities that we had. And you can actually link them to your passion, which I don't think was the case when I started my career. It was, this is a great career, let's just sort of do this, right? So I think the first thing would really be, what are you passionate about? What is it that really excites you? And then there are just so many opportunities within that, right? So for example, if it is impact, if it is social impact, if it is even the environment, or it is, looking at policy making, right? And I think that's what's very interesting about the youth today. They want to be aligned to a lot of policy making. They want their voice to be heard. And there are many, many opportunities there to sort of, because I think there are still a lot of dots to be joined between all the disruption that is happening within technology and, be it fintech or edtech or any of the technology, disruptors. But I think regulation is running a few steps behind, as it will be. And I think there's just a lot to be done there. And I think the youth of today do have that ability. I think they're far more empowered than what we were back then to sort of, give a voice to that, work on it, be associated. Also a lot of organizations around, right? So it's not, for example, in a country also, it's not just your government that is working on policy, but they sort of work with, they would work with the UN, they would work with a lot of other agencies and organizations. So there's just so much out there to do. But I think the first fundamental pillar would be, what are you passionate about? Because that's what, and there'll be an opportunity there for sure.
Okay, I've been informed that we have to wrap up. So there's a lot that we didn't get a chance to talk about. We didn't get a chance to talk really about some of the specific projects, and I think the blockchain space was mentioned several times. A lot of excitement there around provenance of assets, a factory that is emitting carbon and so on. So I think what we'll have to do is we'll just have to get the virtual FinTech Festival to get us all back together again so we can do part 2. So at this point, I would like to just thank the panelists, of course, thank the audience for listening. But let me thank the panelists. Tek Yew Chia from the Singapore FinTech Association, Priti Rathi Gupta, founder of LXME India, and Aiaze Mitha from the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Thanks for joining us tonight. And for DigFin, I am Jame DiBiasio, and check us out online. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jame.
Bye. Thank you, Jame.